Before the next 3 days are over, most people will have already set something in motion without fully realizing they did it. It will not happen through one dramatic event or a moment that obviously announces itself. It will happen through quiet responses, small choices and subtle moments that seem too ordinary to matter. Only afterward will it become clear that something important was decided there. Most people will move through it without noticing anything unusual. Since nothing appears urgent enough to interrupt them, they will assume life is staying exactly as it is, even while something deeper is quietly taking shape beneath the surface. Only a few people tend to notice this kind of shift while it is still forming. They feel it before they can explain it. They pick up on the change before it has fully revealed itself. And once you catch sight of what is actually happening underneath, it becomes almost impossible to pretend you do not see it. Something is already advancing. Whether you feel prepared for it or not, the middle of April carries a different kind of momentum. It is the point where what has been developing in silence stops remaining hidden and starts pressing outward. What felt slow, clouded, or stalled during the past several months begins to move again, and not in a way that stays neatly inside your control. The colder part of the year makes it easy to remain suspended. It supports waiting. It supports thinking without choosing, postponing without consequence, and telling yourself there is still time because nothing seems to require action yet. But this part of the year breaks that atmosphere. Openings begin to appear. Conversations begin to surface. Ideas that have been sitting untouched for too long begin asking to be dealt with. When people hear about a 72-hour window, they often picture some outside opening, as if the world itself briefly becomes more flexible. But that is not really the deepest part of it. The environment is not suddenly bending around you. What changes is that your inner position becomes easier to shift. You become more capable than usual of noticing your direction and deciding whether you still want to keep moving the same way. Mid-April sits in a narrow and unusual part of the year. It is far enough from the beginning that the energy of early intentions has already started to wear thin. But it is still early enough that nothing is fully locked in. The reflective stillness of winter has already started to fade, but the full rush of summer has not taken over yet. This in-between space has its own power, and the changes that happen there often move quickly and quietly at the same time. Most people pass through a natural pattern without even realizing it. First, something enters awareness. Then comes the stage of turning it over mentally, questioning it, doubting it, or trying to ignore it. After that comes the point where something is either acted on or silently abandoned. That sequence does not usually stretch out for months. More often, it happens in short waves over a few days. That is the real meaning behind a 72-hour window. It is not a mystical gate or some grand opening in the sky. It is a period where that internal process reaches resolution faster than usual. Thoughts that have been circling for a while finally land somewhere. Something moves ahead, or something slips away almost without a sound. Change does not always arrive through the moments that look important. Very often it takes hold in the moments that seem easy to dismiss. Most people imagine life-altering changes as intense, unmistakable, and emotionally overwhelming. They expect a dramatic turning point, something heavy enough to make its significance obvious on the spot. But when you look back honestly at the moments that redirected your life, they often did not feel that way while they were happening. They felt ordinary. They looked like average days. And if you had responded differently in those moments, it would not necessarily have seemed like a major choice at the time. That is where the deeper decisions usually happen. Not in chaos, but in stillness. Not when you are cornered, but when you are free to move or remain where you are. Calm days matter because of that. There is no loud pressure demanding a response from you. There is only you, your thoughts, and a brief opening where something can shift if you allow it. And because the atmosphere feels so neutral, most people assume it carries no real weight. The moments that seem easiest to overlook often leave the strongest mark. That is exactly what makes April 12th significant. Nothing about it insists on being treated as special. There may be no outward signal telling you to stop and pay attention. It can pass with the same appearance and rhythm as any other day. And that is precisely why it reveals so much. When you are not reacting to external pressure, your choices become more truthful. You are not just responding in the moment, you are exposing where you genuinely stand. The smaller decisions are often the ones that grow larger with time. In the beginning, they barely seem important. Later, once the results become more visible, the point where you could have shaped them is already behind you. The number 12 shows up again and again for a reason. It carries the idea of completion, of a cycle reaching its natural endpoint before something else can properly begin. It appears in time, in systems, and in repeating structures. It marks the closing of a loop. That is part of what gives April 12th its particular meaning. This is not really about starting over. It is about reaching the place where something can no longer remain unfinished. Before anything can move forward clearly, something has to be acknowledged, settled, or brought to completion. People are naturally drawn to the idea of a new beginning because it sounds clean. It feels like a chance to leave the past behind in a single motion and step into something untouched. But that is rarely how life works when something unresolved is still following you. It does not disappear just because you want to move on. It stays nearby. It returns later. And when it comes back, it usually asks for your attention more forcefully than before. So this moment is not really asking you to begin something new, it is asking you to finish something old. A new chapter does not truly begin the second you look toward the next page. It begins after the previous one has finally been closed. And what needs to be closed is not always dramatic or easy to identify. Sometimes it is a decision you have delayed for so long that it has blended into the background. Sometimes it is something you keep discussing without ever fully choosing. Sometimes it is a situation you continue accepting even though you already know it no longer fits your direction. Sometimes it is simply a version of yourself or a way of thinking that you have already outgrown but have not completely released. Whatever it is not something new that just appeared. It is like you've been present for a while, remaining quiet in the background until you became ready enough to face it more directly. This kind of moment tends to bring those things closer to the surface. Because if it is not closed here, it does not simply vanish. It continues into what comes next. It keeps influencing later choices, shaping later outcomes, and tying you to something that should have already been resolved. What remains unfinished has a way of staying active until it is finally faced. This 72-hour period tends to unfold in a sequence, and once you recognize that structure, it becomes easier to understand why it feels the way it does. April 11 begins with the signal. This is the quiet first stage. Nothing overwhelming happens, and nothing may seem urgent enough to demand your attention. It may show up as a slight change in awareness. A thought may return more often than usual. Something you typically brush aside may become harder to dismiss. No one is forcing you to respond yet. The day simply brings something into view. Because the change is so light, most people overlook it. They turn their attention elsewhere, tell themselves it means nothing, or move on as usual, even though the process has already started. April 12 is when the pressure becomes more noticeable. At this point, what first appeared as a passing thought begins to feel more substantial. The pattern becomes easier to recognize, something vague starts forming a clearer shape. It is still not chaotic or overwhelming, but the weight of it becomes harder to ignore. You can still avoid it, but doing that now requires more effort than before. Pressure does not force the truth into existence, it reveals what has already been postponed. At this stage, awareness becomes much harder to push back down. You begin to recognize what actually needs your attention, even if you still have not taken action yet. It feels closer, sharper, and more present than it did before. Then April 13 brings the internal click. Something settles. It may not look dramatic from the outside, but inwardly something becomes unmistakably clearer. A choice that felt uncertain begins to organize itself. Something that had been difficult to understand suddenly becomes easier to read. And once that clarity appears, even quietly, it tends to remain. You may still hesitate. You may still delay action. But you cannot completely return to the old confusion after that. The uncertainty that existed before no longer feels the same. And the way you move through the signal, the pressure, and that moment of inner recognition starts shaping whether the next phase feels like movement relief or the uneasy realization that something had been asking for your attention long before you were ready to name it. Most people miss the opportunity in moments like this for a simple reason. They try to change too much at once. Their mind jumps to every part of life, every choice, every problem that needs fixing. Within minutes, it all feels too heavy. And when it starts feeling like that, they do what people usually do. They pull back and tell themselves they will return to it later, once they feel clearer. This is one of those times when that response will cost you. This is not about everything. It is about one specific issue that keeps returning to your mind. One decision you have been circling without making. One pattern you have continued to live with even though you already know it is not working, mostly because staying with it feels easier than disrupting it. What matters is how you use these 72 hours, because this is when your energy can actually do something. Spread it across too many things and nothing moves. You can think, analyze, and go back and forth as much as you want, but you still end up in the same place, only more drained than before. Real clarity does not come from trying to sort out your entire life at once. It usually begins when you face one thing directly. A lot of people keep waiting for a feeling that never really arrives. They want certainty first. They want confidence first. They want to feel fully prepared before they act. They assume clarity should come before movement, when most of the time it works the other way around. You do not always understand it before you begin. That is where your advantage appears. You do not need some rare ability, extra time, or perfect knowledge. While other people are still replaying everything in their minds, trying to settle every doubt before doing anything, you are willing to move anyway, even if the step is small and imperfect. That alone shifts the whole situation. People are rarely stuck because there are no solutions. More often, they stay stuck because they keep waiting for confirmation. Over these 72 hours, the difference between thinking and acting becomes easier to see. You will notice it in yourself. One part of you will want to move. Another part will tell you to wait a little longer, think a little more, make sure it is the right choice first. And if you keep listening to that second voice the way you usually do, then nothing really changes. Momentum starts before everything makes sense. Even one small action can create it. And once momentum begins, things start opening in ways they did not while you were sitting still. You notice options you could not see before. You understand things that stayed foggy as long as they only lived in your head. Action brings things into view that thinking can keep hidden. That is the real edge here. You are not being asked to fix every problem. You are not even being asked to make the perfect decision. You are simply being asked to stop standing still when you already know something needs to shift. The moment you are willing to move, even slightly, you are already ahead of most people who are still waiting for the ideal moment, the one that never seems to arrive. By the time everything finally feels obvious, the easiest window for change is often already gone, and what could have been a small correction turns into something harder and slower to repair. Most people will miss what is happening, not because it is invisible, but because they do not know how to read it. The moment something subtle starts changing, they explain it away. They call it a random mood, tension, stress, or overthinking. And once they label it like that, they disconnect from it. Instead of treating it like something worth paying attention to, they turn it into something easy to dismiss. That is how the opening disappears. At times like this, nothing dramatic announces itself. It does not arrive loudly or force its way into your life. It usually shows up quietly, as a repeated thought, a growing discomfort, or a clear sense that something is no longer right. And instead of leaning closer to it, most people reach for distraction. They scroll, they fill their time. They stay busy enough to avoid having to sit with what is really there. Distraction is not as harmless as it looks. It is one of the main ways people delay meaningful change. The danger is that it rarely feels like avoidance. It looks ordinary. It feels productive enough, entertaining enough, normal enough, but underneath it, the unresolved thing is still there, waiting for the attention it never receives, so the pattern repeats. A few weeks later, the same thought comes back. The same decision gets pushed off again. The same habits stay in place, not because they are permanent, but because they were never fully faced when the chance first appeared. These 72 hours matter because they tend to bring background truths a little closer to the surface. Not completely, and not in a way that solves everything at once, but enough for you to see them clearly and respond. Most people will miss that moment, not because they do not want change, but because they do not recognize when change actually begins. Strip it down, and the truth is simple. April 12th means nothing by itself. A date does not transform your life. The phrase 72-hour window does not create movement on its own. It only points to something that was already building long before you gave it your attention. What changes things is more direct than that. It is the moment you stop searching outside yourself for a reason to act and start answering what has already been growing within you. Nothing really moves until you stop asking the outside world to validate what you already know. That is the part people avoid, because once the power is no longer in the day, it has to be in the decision. And even a small decision asks something of you. This window does not suddenly place new opportunities, new problems, or brand new paths in front of you. What it does is sharpen what is already there. It makes things a little harder to ignore, a little easier to recognize, and a little more possible to address. That is all. It does not force you anywhere. No one is steering your life for you. It simply gives you a clearer view of what needs attention and then leaves the rest in your hands. Some people will treat that moment seriously. They will move toward it, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if the first step is small, even if they still do not have everything figured out. Others will notice it, feel it briefly, and let it pass. From the outside, those two choices may not look very different at first. With time, though, the gap between them starts to show. Your life does not change in a single night. What changes is what you do with the moment when something real asks for your response. So this is really about recognizing something honest when it appears and deciding whether to engage with it this time or let it slip past the way it usually does. It is not about the date, the time, or the idea of some special doorway. You do not need to throw yourself into everything at once. You also do not need perfect clarity before you move. Just notice what has been trying to get your attention and do not brush past it again. Sometimes the smallest sincere action in a moment like this carries more weight than it seems to at first. Whatever the next few days bring, movement begins the second you stop holding it off.